The lesson from Galatians 5, 13 and 15 is in the bulletin, but I want to read the big introductory verse of the chapter as well. So from verse 1 of chapter 5, we read, "For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery." And then in verse 13 to 15, "For you were called to freedom, brothers and sisters. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence, but through love become slaves to one another. For the whole law is summed up in a single commandment: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. If, however, you bite and devour one another, take care that you are not consumed by one another." The word of God for God's people today. Thanks be to God. A group of youngsters was asked at random what they like about living in the United States. Little Jackie said, "We've got more stuff in America, more stuff than anywhere in the world. We have pizza, and it doesn't grow anywhere else except here, except maybe Italy." Elliot said, "Everybody wants to live in America because we own the moon. The president paid God $1 million for it." Tina said, "America's great because you get the best friends here. The last time I counted, I had over 1,000 friends, and I don't know anybody with as many friends as me." David said, "America's great because it's bigger and we have more supermarkets. I don't know much about other countries except Russia. I know there's lots of Russians in Russia." Jonathan said, "Other countries aren't free like America. They don't let you go to church, and if you do, they whip you and throw you in prison." Sean said, "America's great because we have the most plumbers. That's because we've got more tubs." He said, "I want to be a plumber like my uncle because he's rich." And Lou sort of brought us back down to earth. When asked what was great about, what he liked about America, Lou said, "What's America?" We are celebrating a long weekend, and some of our faithful are obviously celebrating elsewhere because we are missing a few of our regular crowd. But the thing about it is, do you realize that a number of people, a lot of people, don't know what or why they celebrate? A Gallup poll showed that 1 out of 4 Americans, that's 25%, don't know that the 4th of July commemorates the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Even more amazing is that same number, 1 in 4, don't know what country we were declaring independence from. I won't put anybody on the spot in here. I'll extend the same offer I did for Gray. But I wonder how many of us, if we raise our hands, have read the Declaration of Independence in its entirety. About 1 in 4, about that same percentage, about 25% of the country has ever read those words. A couple of years ago, a newspaper reporter decided to try a little experiment, and he took a section of the Declaration of Independence and went out on the streets, and he handed the paper to people and asked them for their reaction to these words. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it." Well, the people thought it was radical. People thought it was radical, said it was much, much too radical. Some said it was silly idealism. Quite a few said, "I bet it was written by a communist." Interesting, 122 people handed the paper. 13 of them recognized those words as being from the Declaration of Independence. Now, I believe you would have done better had I asked you to raise your hand. I was thinking we are celebrating this July 4th Independence Day weekend. Tomorrow, our country will celebrate its 240th birthday, and we call it Independence Day, but But maybe we should call it more correctly the Declaration of Independence Day. For we know that merely by signing, quite literally there, John Hancock on the paper, that the Declaration did not establish our independence. King George did not read the Declaration and say to Thomas Jefferson, "Nice piece of writing, Tom. Y'all enjoy your country. Send me a postcard from Colonial Williamsburg." We know that that is not the case, that it took years of struggle. It took great sacrifice. And we dare not forget that struggle. On July 3rd, George Washington wrote a letter to his wife anticipating the hardships that would occur. He wrote, "In a few days you will see a declaration setting forth the causes which have impelled us to this mighty revolution and the reasons which will justify it in the sight of God. I am fully aware of the toil and blood and treasure it will cost to maintain this declaration and support and defend these states. Yet through all the gloom, I can see the rays of ravishing light and glory." We do not want to forget those who paid the price to win our freedom. Our freedom has come at a great price. We can think about our own families, friends, acquaintances. We can all, I would imagine all, remember those who have given their time, maybe who have sacrificed a limb or sight or hearing or some other personal sacrifice, even those who have given their life to defend and protect our freedom. We know that right now there are men and women who are deployed to protect us. Think of all those who went before. The Declaration of Independence was signed by 56 men. 5 were captured and tortured by the British and killed. 9 died in the war. 2 had sons killed in the war. Others had families captured. 12 had their homes ransacked and burned. They paid a price for our freedom. And there have been thousands that have joined the line of defense since then. Thousands who have paid the price to defend our freedom. And the price tag of that freedom is too significant to ignore. Today, part of gathering and celebrating as a nation, even in the context of worship, is to remember those who have served, to remember those who fought long ago to establish this country, and also to say thank you to all have fought to secure and defend it. And so before I connect the scripture to this day, I thought it might be nice if we would just ask our veterans to stand up, so we could acknowledge. Would all of our veterans stand up this morning? Because they are part of that long line that paid a price for our freedom. It's who we are as a country. Others have given their lifeblood to forge out our free land. And we dare not take those sacrifices for granted. I know that when we gather, one of the things we give thanks for is for the freedoms we enjoy. Part of our cause for celebration is we are aware that indeed God has shed His grace on us. In our lesson from Galatians, St. Paul writes, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." And in verse 13, "For you were called to freedom, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence, but through love become slaves to one another." Our freedom requires responsibilities, obligations even. John Marquand, in his book, The Wickford Point, tells about a family. Some of you may have read the characters of this story. Their last name is Brill. The Brill family is an unusual family. They are living off the lingering reputation of a generation that has gone before, a character known as the Wickford Sage. The Sage was a famed New England poet, and all the characters in the Brill family are wastrels. The Sage had made a name, and they are just riding on it. Archie, the father, is a mural artist who never paints any murals. The young men are forever chasing improbable jobs that never amount to anything. The young women are chasing old money males who never amount to anything. The Brills are bound to each other by an unhealthy dependence, but it is their mother who epitomizes their family. She spends most of her days lounging on a couch and saying things like, "Why doesn't anyone ever take care of me, darling? I get tired of doing everything for everybody else. I have to take care of everyone else all the time. It would be nice if somebody would take care of me for a change." The problem is everybody in the family is saying the same thing. The Brills have one thing that we all long for. They have economic freedom. But their freedom has robbed them of any sense of responsibility. They don't have any sense of obligation to anyone other than themselves and their self-indulgences. Pampered people rarely develop a sense of responsibility. Without a sense of responsibility to our families, to our communities, to our God, we waste away emotionally, morally, spiritually. Freedom carries with it responsibility. We're not free to do nothing, but we are freed, in fact, to love and free others. The idea that freedom means no encumbrances is not Christian freedom. Freedom is not the absence of entanglements. Rather, it is the entanglements that allow us to use our freedom to free others. Christian freedom does not look for self-indulgent, but rather sees it as a call, a purpose in that freedom. Paul says unequivocally, freedom is for love. That Christ calls us into relationship with others, the epitome of which is that the whole law can be reduced to the one commandment: love your neighbor as yourself. That we are set free from all else so that we might live as slaves through love to others. Harriet Tubman knew how precious freedom is. Harriet's grandparents were in Ghana, part of the Ashanti people. They were kidnapped and made slaves in 1725. Harriet was actually the third generation in her family to live as slaves in this country. But Harriet Tubman won her freedom and became a link to freedom for others in her family and for hundreds of other slaves as well. Harriet became, as many of you know, the most famous conductor on what's been called the Underground Railroad. Harriet's flight from slavery started because her family was about to be split up. She and her brothers were going to be sold to a chain gang, which meant worse conditions, but also meant they would probably never see their family again. So she decided to escape. And so she escaped. She traveled mostly at night and hid in fields and barns during the day. Her life depended on her carefulness in every step. The fact that this lone woman traveled from the deep south to the free territories and remained hidden and won her freedom is remarkable in and of itself. The fact that she chose then to come back to get others is amazing. She risked recapture, beatings, jail time, even death to come help others out of slavery. She had won her freedom, but it was not for self-indulgence. It was that so that she could become a slave for others in love. She came back time after time so that others might be free. That's the model of freedom that Paul's talking about. Our freedom is not just for us. She couldn't, according to Paul, have just stayed free. But her freedom, in Christian freedom, she made herself a slave to others that they might also be free. It is the pattern we see from Jesus himself, who, according to Philippians, sat at the very right hand of God, but did not count equality with God as something to be grasped, but submitted and humbled himself and became a slave, obedient even unto death. Free, but not free for self-indulgence. Free in order to save and serve others. You know, when we encounter that kind of commitment, it inspires us. It challenges us. A friend of our family, Jim Seahorn, is a retired Air Force general, and Jim was a member of a congregation I served, and we traveled on mission trips together, and Jimmy and the boys have traveled with him. Jim was a POW for 65 months in Vietnam. Part of that time he was confined with now Senator John McCain, and he told me about one of his stories that he tells. He's told our youth. He told. I've heard him say many times, was about somebody that he was incarcerated with there, Lieutenant Commander Mike Christian. Mike had taken, they issued the POW as sort of a blue pajama kind of top to wear in these cells. And Mike took some red fabric and some white fabric that he found from the ticking of a mattress, and he sewed them into the lining of his pajama top and fashioned an American flag with the red and the white and the blue of the pajamas. And they would hold up and put his pajama top on the wall every evening in their cell, and they would stand up and salute that flag, and they would say the Pledge of Allegiance, and it bound them together, and it reminded them of their purpose every night. And one night, as they were doing that, the guards came in, and they saw the flag, and they saw the men, and they took the flag, and they figured out whose it was because he was the only one without the top on. They took Mike out. They destroyed the flag, and they beat him brutally. And a few hours later, when they brought him back and dumped him on the floor of the cell, Mike crawled over to his bed and started tearing off pieces of the ticking to sew a new flag. When people are that committed, you can't stop them. They inspire us, and they change the world. Paul had that kind of commitment. He said, to live is Christ, to die is gain. They could not take his property or his freedom or even his life, and it set him free. It set him free to serve God in a way that few are set free. You know, many people fail to understand the price of freedom that we enjoy as Americans. They don't see the sacrifice. They'll celebrate this weekend, and they won't think about the people who gave their life so that we could be free. They'll take it for granted. That same thing is true for many in regard to the freedom that Christ offers us. Our freedom from sin, our freedom from death came at a great price, a price that Christ paid for us. We have been set free from sin and the grave. We've been freed from the burden of our sin, and many don't understand that. They've yet to hear and understand that amazing grace. Part of why the church exists is to introduce new people to that freedom that Christ has bought for us. And we must remember, as those who know, we must remember we're not set free to do nothing. Quite the contrary. We are set free so that we can love, so that we can serve others. Paul says, don't use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence. And then one last line to that passage that I think is so important in our world today. It ends, take care that you do not devour, that you do not consume one another. I believe this is maybe the greatest opportunity we have right now in the church to witness to our world. How we disagree is as important as anything we do. We must demonstrate how to disagree without demonizing our opponents. Public discourse, letters to the editor, they are so harsh and cutting. The anger and the resentment and the prejudice and the judgment are amazing. It reminds me of the somewhat comical, but unfortunately could be truthful story about the pastor who got sick. He was in the hospital. He was sick and in the hospital, and the chairman of the board came to visit him and said, bring good news and greetings from the church. The administrative council passed a resolution to petition God for your full healing, and it passed 23-12. The divisiveness in our country is destroying our ability to move ahead. The way we disagree corrodes the hope of unity in the future. And unfortunately, the exact same thing can be said about the church. We would do well to listen to Paul's admonition to not consume one another, to not devour one another, to find ways in our disagreements to lower our voices, to control our temperaments, to be civil with all persons. It doesn't mean we give away our convictions, but at times, even in the church, we've disagreed in ways that undercut the validity of our message. Let's promise, let's vow and seek and pray to find ways to disagree without being disagreeable. America's fractured community and the church needs peacemakers. How we do what we do is as important as what we do. Many will celebrate this long weekend, already are. 25% don't know why. Many will never stop to think about the price that's been paid for our freedom. Sadly, the same is true of this celebration and this remembrance that we remember today. There are many who do not remember that Christ died for our sin. They do not remember the price that was paid for our freedom from death, and that we were not set free for nothing. We were not set free for self-indulgence, but we were set free for love, to love our neighbor. Christ our Lord invites to this table all who seek to love each other, who seek forgiveness and want to live peaceably with one another. I invite you to open your hymnals to page 12 in the front, and we will join in this remembrance, remembering what has been done and why. And I remind you, you don't have to be a member of this church. You don't have to be a member of the Methodist Church. You need only believe in the saving power of Christ. This is His table, not ours. So you are welcome at this place. Let us confess our sin before God and one another.